Hi everyone, welcome to the third part of this study session focusing on donking turns. We're again looking at the same spot, so button versus big blind single raise pots, primarily looking at flops where it goes check B33 call, and then looking this time at straight completing turns. So we've previously looked at the paired turns and flush turns, and so now kind of completing the set with the straight completing turns. These are all sort of the boards that we're primarily going to be wanting to look at building donking ranges on. So again, we've got examples here: 10 5 4 6, ace 5 8 3, queen jack 4 9. Just basically looking at any board where we've now bringing in straights. I mean, often there'll be a random gut shot that's completed or whatnot. So I suppose we're focusing more on the slightly more connected ones rather than the obscure straights that get there. But again, thinking about what we want our donkey strategy to be, the main candidates, and then as well looking at villain's response and any exploits that are available. So once again, if you feel like it, you can pause the video here, have a think about what your strategy is, and this might also just be realizing that you may not be playing any donks in any of these spots, and so I suppose then viewing this session as just an eye opener as to the types of strategies that can be available to you. Um, and I've again done the study beforehand, which I'll go into in terms of the overall findings that I've had. So I'll just bring those off screen and bring them on back at the end. And we'll work through sort of a number of tabs that I've got up on screen. Up on screen here, we'll work through these situations. Okay, so we might start with 10 5 4, and here we're looking at let's first actually look at the B33 line. So when it goes B33 call, and then we get the turn breakdown here. Again, we're looking at donks around the 6, the 7, the 3, the 4 primarily as well, and the 2. So we can sort of see a donking region on all of these low cards. And again, once again, we say that the donk strategy, when we want to implement it, is for a small size. So looking at B20 once again. And if we just, let's go on to, let's go for the 6 of spades. Once again, the strategy, because it's such a small bet, is going to be quite merged. Most hands in range can lead for a small size. So if we look at the filters, we get to donk some, all sorts of no main hands in terms of these are straight draws and gut shots, and obviously some of them are the flush draw as well. Even actually some donks with just queen high here, just no additional equity. So there are some, primarily I suppose these hands are going to be blocking villain's top pair combos, and they also just have 2 overcards, like queen jack has 2 overcards to improve against villains, ace 10 for example. But yeah, so we can see pretty much anything can choose to donk. We're going to be donking a bunch of top pairs. But notably, we're not donking, all of our straights. If I can, yeah. So we're not donking all of our straights. So 8-7 and 3-2 being the 2 straights that we arrive onto the turn with. Neither of them are donking for a pure frequency. So that is sort of important to keep in mind, that we are, donking like a large portion of our range, but we are sort of mixing the frequencies. I mean, I'm sure if you wanted to build this in as an exploit, and ultimately, if we look at this full strategy, it's once again not a mistake to donk sort of any hand in range, right? So if you wanted to actually just ignore the frequencies and just donk at a super high frequency here, it's not going to be a frequency mistake. You're obviously making sorry, it's none of the individual decisions to donk are going to be an EV mistake. But when you are doing it at too high a frequency, obviously villains can counter exploit you. But in anonymous pools, particularly like Ignition, no one's going to be able to see that you're, say, donking here all of the time. So that's up to you as sort of whether you followed the GTO frequency in terms of doing this, a quarter of the time, or if you want to look at doing this more or less often. once again, I suppose the decision to donk is probably built based around a couple of things. The first I'll show you is the difference in sizings. So this is just the frequency on ace 8-5. We can see that versus a b33 on the flop, this turn report, the donking is fairly minimal, right? Um, this is one of the boards where there just really isn't much going on. But if we face the larger sizing, all of a sudden we do see that frequency start to pick up. And again, if we actually like increase this to B125, let's see if the same thing holds. So just bring up the turn report here. So B125. I mean, now again, you see just like donking on a lot of these low cards. There's a lot of donking in general, actually, on like a range of cards here. But it still follows the same sort of frequency that as we increase the size in terms of what we faced on the flop, that we actually get to implement this donking range more and more frequently. Whereas versus the small size on a reasonably favorable texture for the button, we really don't get to implement this donk very often. So that's the first thing. It's looking at the size that we faced on the flop in terms of how often that we donk. And then the second thing is just once again looking at whether the card is particularly favorable for the big blinds range. And that we can simplify to really just thinking about when we've got straights that are completing low boards, those are going to be typically the ones that we want to donk, whereas when we've got straights completing high boards, so for example here we've got Queen Jack 4, there's really not much of a donking range on the turn. For any of the straight completers, a king comes and it's really insignificant, a 10 comes and it's basically zero. The reason for that, of course, is like when a 10 comes, we're bringing actually straights into the buttons range because button has ace king at a pure frequency, and we never have ace king from the big blind, right? So when the 10 completes, like, yes, we get there with 9-8, but actually, we've actually just brought in a whole bunch of nutted straights for the button, and that's going to mean that this is actually, a reasonably bad turn for the big blind and not one that we want to consider donking on. So that's kind of a little bit of the logic there, just around we're going to want to donk more on the low boards. So again, here we've got the contrast of 8-7-6, again facing a small bet and called, and then when we get these low turns like a 4 and a 5, we've got this really high donking frequency, or not super high, right? Like it's still a like moderate to low frequency, but we can actually do it again once again with a large portion of our range. And then I think so I guess the nice learning from this study combined with the two previous studies that we did looking at both paired turns and then also flush turns as well is that it's always the same strategy in that it's this small donk size that we're implementing, and all of them are with a really merged range. So we kind of can identify, yep, we've got a board where we know that donks are okay, and then we know that we're not going to be making an EV mistake by trying to trying to donk any single hand. We might be making a frequency mistake if we're not looking to, randomize to match GTO purpose perfectly. But that's not really going to be an issue in the grand scheme of things. So then I suppose the next thing to look at is probably once again the response. So let's look at, we've got here ace 5-3, turn came a 4. Once again, this is a board where, again, we get to sort of implement quarter of the time B20. Again, quite a merged range. Really just doing it with pretty much any combo in range at some frequency. We do, I see that it's centered around like these overpairs to they're like overpair plus open-ended straight draw or gut shot for pocket sevens, and also just their second pair outright on the turn at least. Same with like king 5 being a pure bet as well. Yeah, king 4, king 3 also being like really high frequency as well. So anyway, we've got this small donk, and then looking at the button response, And again, similar to the previous study sessions that we did, we look at villain's response and it seems relatively unintuitive in terms of, um, they can't fold much, which makes sense. We're only betting 20% of the pot, right? So they have to continue by either calling or raising at a really high frequency. And what that means is they actually do just need to raise a bunch of junk. So if we just isolate their, all right, let me clear that, isolate their no made hands here, we have a bunch that are, mainly pure folding, but there's small frequency raises, and I think all of these are just not going to be found. Like obviously the spade combos are going to call or raise, like that's going to happen. But looking at the offsuit combos, like here, I don't think it's realistic that anyone's ever going to take, Jack nine of hearts here and raise it at a 10% frequency, right? Almost all of population is just going to pure fold versus the donk would be my assumption. We do see these like queen seven, queen six hands, which obviously the 6x I don't expect to ever fold, and yeah, they can continue with call or raise. I would typically expect that most of these hands are going to continue with call more often than raise. That would be my assumption, and so it may be the case that again they're not populations not making not turning 9-6 of hearts into a raise enough of the time, which means ultimately when the river bricks, they'll be carrying still a bunch of air through to the river just in the calling range. And same with these, like, Jack 7 of hearts. I don't think it's absurd that some people will just outright fold Jack 7 of hearts. Like, it is versus a very small sizing, but again, some aspects of the population aren't going to appropriately adjust to the fact that they're facing such a small bet, and that therefore they need to continue super wide. So once again, we're probably seeing, I mean, here the fold frequency is zero, right? So it's necessarily true that population can't be over defending this combo. Like as soon as you get one nit who's folding Jack seven of hearts, population is over folding. And then I think it's also probably true that it gets under raised, right? So that's once again sort of the takeaway. And then as to whether if we look at the top end of range, so we look at sort of straight sets, two pairs, pretty high raise frequency, which I think we'll probably experience from population as well. They're likely to play their strong hands pretty fast here. I mean, some people are going to get more scared in that it is a four liner. Any two makes a straight, so maybe there is a little bit more just like passivity with some of these two pair combos. But we can see like ace five off is pretty much like pure calling, 92% of the time. So like I expect villains to be under aggressing with their bluff port. Sorry, I can't speak. With their bluff portion of their range, and then probably matching this frequency something along that line with their value portion. Maybe again playing it too fast. So it's probably a similar takeaway to what we had previously in that we expect villains to overfold, and so we make a lot of EV through just the turn donk. We can fold more against their aggression, and then yeah, they're probably carrying through too weak a range onto the river through just like their calling range. River, once again, like relatively intuitive in terms of what we want to do. Again, we can use the massive overbets. So we have this like contrast between B20 on the turn and then a 7x pot shove. Obviously, basing the 7x pot shove around 2x. Interestingly, like the I think it's if we can I just isolate 7-6. Oh no, it is going just pure all in. I thought there was some more checks with 7-6 combos, but anyway, um, that's going to be your all in portion of range. Oh no, sorry, here we go. We've got checks coming from the 7-6. I'm not sure why I wasn't seeing this before. Yeah, so 7-6 is actually checking at a really high frequency. Which, like in practice, do you want to do that? I'm not sure that that's clear to me. Like, I think we probably just want to be driving pot growth ourselves in these spots and expecting villains not to be sort of finding the creative bluffs that GTO is going to find. So I think in practice it's probably better to just like shove 7-6 would be my assumption. Um, and then once again, sort of following this intuitive line that our B300 is still primarily built around our 2x, but then once we start getting into like our B75 line, this is now starting to be driven by our sets, our strong two pairs. And then when we get down to like a B20, like our block range, again, now this is just like strong top pair. So again, once it's just a very intuitive, you can structure your sizings based around, the value combos that you're carrying through to the river and then build in the bluffs around that. Obviously there is like a pretty high check frequency though. So we are just like high frequency going B20 on the turn and then checking river or just super polarizing with our all-ins. And then like I think the all-ins from a bluff perspective, if we just look at the full height here, uh, but I see everything. Anyway, I think the bluff portion of part of the range is coming from this like 6x and 7x, which is like quite natural. Just like blocking the combos of 7-6 is kind of what we want to do here. We do also just see some like fairly random combos that can just be all in here. We've just like king jack off, which is kind of nuts. That sort of exists in theory. Obviously, it's super low frequencies. And then if we want to look at villains like response versus I think actually sorry I was looking at probably the B300, not the all in when I was looking at some of those combos. Um, but if we do just want to look at like villains response versus all in, I think the way you want to think about your river sizing is just choosing the point where we think we're starting to get, overfolds if we're bluffing, and the maximum where we're, getting paid enough, basically the sweet spot with our value portion of our range. So, for example, if we're looking at this like all-in size, villain does have to find some heroes at low frequency with ace X. So if we just look at that as our strategy, it's like, most ace X is pure folding or like high frequency folding, but then there's slithers of calls. So if we've got a villain who actually is going to find like a sick hero call down with, ace jack offsuit, which is supposed to almost be a pure fold, then we really shouldn't be finding this all-in size as a bluff. And actually, we should just like always put our 2x in this all-in range. If, on the other hand, we sort of have data points to suggest, okay, villains just like always folding an ace here, they're never going to hero call, they're going to pure fold ace 10, they're going to start folding some sets, right? Like they're going to pure fold 10s, all of that sort of stuff. Then all of a sudden, all in becomes really attractive prospect with your bluffs. So this is really getting into the population tendencies of and the individual villain tendencies. Are they going to overfold or underfold, and against which sizes are they going to sort of appropriately find the defend frequencies? And obviously, you can tailor this against if we're only betting 3x pot, then all of a sudden they need to always call two pair, for example, or almost always call it. And so again, you'll get some villains who are just like snap calling two pair here because they have two pair and they don't want to fold it, right? And so against those villains, we don't really want to use this as a bluff sizing because two pairs supposed to start folding. Um, Against other villains, they'll actually start folding two pair at 40% frequency as opposed to 11% frequency. And so then that might suggest that actually we want to use B300 as our sort of bluff sizing. So that's sort of how I would approach these spots. It's again like it's tough to know exactly what villains are going to be, what their response frequency is going to be. It's particularly on ignition, which is an anonymous pool, so you can't have a large sample on a particular reg, but often you can look at specific tendencies and get an idea as to whether you're up against a reg who's going to have those hero calling tendencies or not. And so that's sort of the way that I would think about approaching the spot. Alrighty, that I think wraps up the donking on the turn sort of study sessions that we've done. So now looked at flush draws, straight draws, and paired turns. And I think overall, like, have found similar strategy nodes on each of these study sessions. So using a B20 with a really merged range on all of these textures, particularly when the turn texture favors the big blind range, which makes intuitive sense. And then also that we can find the higher frequency donks when we faced a larger c-bet size on the flop is probably the other main takeaway. And sorry, I just realized I didn't bring this one up. This is specifically for the turn donking on straight boards. Again, I've covered most of this off. Strategy is B20, basing it around whether or not the straight completing is favorable for the big blind or whether it's favorable for the button. Um, Again, increase the donking frequency with the when we face a larger c-bet size, and then finally just that perspective that the response to this node is quite unintuitive, and so we're expecting some overfolds in a bunch of situations. Anyway, that kind of wraps up this study session series for this particular node. So if you have any other like spots on the game tree that you want me to take a look at, I'm more than happy to do so. And so can start up a separate series of these study sessions. So please leave it in the comments below. Give the video a like if you enjoyed it, and subscribe if you haven't already. And I'll catch you on the next video. Cheers.